Hello, and welcome to another edition of On the Hill Media. I'm Fosie Weston, and today my guest is candidate for District 13, candidate for delegate, Mr. Jeff Robertson. How are you doing today, Mr. Robertson?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can you first tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. As a candidate for District 13, encompasses the eastern and southern ends of Howard County. I have lived here in Howard County for most of the past 17 years, 11 of which I've lived in the southern end in North Laurel. I'm someone who's been a candidate for basically the past year and a half, but before that time, and even up through this time, I've been a businessman here in Howard County. I have a family that consists of my wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. And they've decided that it's time for their father to go out and see if he can make a change in the world as a politician. So that's why I come to this point in my life. Over the past 15 years, my experience as a businessman is kind of my foundation for what I think makes me a good candidate. 15 years ago, I started a company called Applied Technology Solutions. We were a firm that focuses on designing and consulting on the design of data centers and high-tech facilities. So I have a technology background that gives me an interesting perspective on both government issues and business issues. What I'm trying to do is take that background and that understanding, that foundation, and take it to Annapolis to allow us to get a different perspective from delegates down there than the ones we've gotten in the past.
Right.
I basically also have a community background. I've been involved in a number of community activities over the past 15 years, primarily as a PTA member on my son's middle school and elementary school and high school PTAs, in terms of working as a leader and a vice president and a committee chairman on a number of occasions. I have coached many kids. I have many teams that I've enjoyed leading kids and helping them to understand the enjoyment of basketball and baseball over the years. And one of the important things in the community is that I was the Homeowners Association president for 2 years, a few years back, and I think I led us through a very new and innovative period in our community. So bringing all those things together, I'm hoping to take the leadership skills that I've learned over the years, having been in the Army, having led a firm, having gone through school to get a postgraduate education, and take all those things together in a way that makes me an effective legislator and delegate in Annapolis.
Now, what do you hope to accomplish if elected into office?
I guess the main thing I'm looking to do is to try to encourage Annapolis to look at itself in a slightly more business-like fashion. What you see in Annapolis is that there's a lot of people asking for a lot of things. Definitely the nature of a political entity and an environment like our state capitol. And you've got people pulling on you from all different directions. But what we don't often do, and have the most difficulty doing with those kind of strains, is figuring out how to make sure there's a long-term interest that's being served, not only for the interests that are asking for response, but also for the citizens and the voters of this state. With my management background, I consider myself to be a problem solver. I spent a lot of time looking at individual problems on a day-by-day basis. I've spent a lot of time as a business owner looking at how to help not only my employees, but all of the clients that I have to work with. And I think that when you're a legislator, you have to take that same problem-solving mentality to Annapolis and not only look at next year's election or next year's General Assembly session, but look at how we're going to stand 4 to 5 years to 10 years down the road and try to make sure that the investments we make are both timely and realistic. So I hope to bring that realism to Annapolis when I get there.
All right, Mr. Robertson, in the next legislative year, our General Assembly has to make $1 billion in budget cuts. How do we achieve this?
The interesting thing about the budget cuts, and I will agree with one of my opponents who has framed the issue of one of a wish list. what we have in Annapolis is a target budget goal and a realistic actual budget goal that comes in from year to year. And each year, between the governor paring it back in advance and the legislature also taking a stab, we by definition have to have a balanced budget because the Constitution mandates it. So the question comes up, why is there $1 million deficiency, so to speak, between those two? Well, it's two things. One is the fact that there are a lot of people who expect that spending this year will be the same or greater than spending was last year. And that is something I'll address in a second. But the second and most important factor in causing the difference tends to be the fact that there's a large number of mandatory expenditures that have been put into place, not so much because we're trying to create a balancing of interests in the budget, but because we've got a mandate from a particular piece of legislation. And there are all these tens and hundreds of legislative mandates out there that force the governor to put the minimum expectations for funding for each of those programs into the budget.
Right.
Then the governor takes a look at what else there is on top of it, which is the discretionary budget, and discovers there's very little discretionary left in the overall scheme of things. So now we're forced into paring back a lot of the discretionary spending, or alternately finding ways to pare back some of these mandatory spending requirements that have been imputed by legislation. What we've discovered over time is that we've gotten really good at just kind of ignoring a lot of the mandatory spending requirements. But what that does is that disappoints an awful lot of people. People who had expectations that some part of education under the Thornton Act was going to be met each and every year going forward from the day it was authorized in 2002. Some of the requirements for state spending of road maintenance and the like, all those things have certain expectations built on the legislation. What we need to do in a year or two is we need to go back and look at the gross aggregation of mandates and say, what is this doing to us as a state, and come up with a way that pairs back those mandates in one complete session, and does it not just for that next year, but looks at it as a 10-year cycle. Now, that's going to get us to a position where the structural deficit, that's what they call it, won't be a recurring problem. It will be, there'll still be pressures, there'll still be people asking for things, but it won't be mandated in law if we can get it under control.
Right.
How do we get to that point? We are likely going to need to apply either a freeze this year, a complete and absolute freeze, including mandated spending, so that it doesn't go up by the mandatory amounts. Or potentially we may have to apply, from what I've seen, a 1% overall cut. My perspective is it needs to be across the board. It needs to be a position where everybody is experiencing it at the exact same level, because that's the only way that we will be able to get past the political furor that's going to occur when you've got all these interest groups that are saying, no, pick me, no, pick me. If we do it across the board in one fell swoop, I think we can get through this next year, get to the point where we've come up with a long-term plan and eliminate the structural deficit.
Right. Now, with the cuts like that, now how will we boost job creation here?
Excuse me. Job creation is based on the idea that people have jobs. I'm sorry, the economy is based on the idea that people have jobs. Job creation is going to need to improve over time by focusing on a more balanced approach to bringing new opportunities into this state. Right now, for the past 4 years in particular, but I'd say for a longer period of time, we have become very dependent on federal largesse and federal programs, both bringing in federal jobs directly for the federal government, as well as federal contractors, and bringing those kind of opportunities into the state. While they're well and good, they certainly have kept the economy afloat here. I also believe that we've reached a tipping point where that balance may start to at least stabilize and potentially go down.
Right.
We have got to start focusing now on where most new jobs end up being created, and those are in small businesses. Small, new entrepreneurial firms that are encouraged by the state government to bring in 1 or 2 people as a starting point, and then grow 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 people within a year or two based on the idea they're producing a good service or they're producing a good product. And it has to go beyond the federal programs. It has to go to something that we can use to either support the consumers in this state, or better yet, consumers outside of this state, across the country and across the world. The way to make that happen is going to, in my mind, well, in fact, it's not just in my mind. Last night we held a business forum of about 30 people in this community in Howard County who were predominantly businessmen. And what I heard, the hue and cry I heard from every one of them, was that financing, capital, credit were the biggest impediments right now to making that happen. The second biggest issue was the fact that they didn't feel there was stability at the state level as far as what was going to happen as they approached opening a new business. They felt that there was an inherent anti-business bias at the state level, and we have to make a statement in this state that says we are not biased against firms. We are not biased against companies. We're not going to hit them with new unemployment taxes every time they turn around, with new employment requirements to make it less likely that they're going to hire a new employee. So if we can create the stability, and secondly, create a new program that encourages and enhances the credit and financing opportunities for small and mid-sized businesses to grow. Those two things together are going to be what bring us back from the edge of being an anti-business state.
Okay, we understand that America is going green. Now, what are your ideas on getting some of your local constituents on that same bandwagon?
Well, the good news is Howard County is probably one of the top environmentally sensitive counties in the state.
Right.
You know, we were one of the first people out there as far as the recycling program and bringing the bins, and everybody loves them, and nobody's going to argue against the idea that we are trying to retain the image of green and pass it from generation to generation. Where I take a slightly different perspective is, again, my background is in building big boxy computer rooms that draw lots and lots of energy and power. Right. And I think that where we need to start focusing is in the utilization of energy in this state, and some of it already is being done. You see a lot of activity going on in the Energy Star program. Everybody in Maryland tends to be sensitive to it, but we need to keep encouraging people to buy energy efficient products whenever they go out there, and to also be aware of a lot of the lost energy that we expend just in leaving the house and leaving things turned on in the kind of the middle mode. Right. But beyond that, we also need to look at continuing to encourage a lot of the design and development green activities that are out there. Whenever you're building a new home, try to encourage from a state perspective the development using recycled materials wherever possible. Continue and expand the program for new homes and for renovations of homes and for new buildings, so that there's an incentive to put in energy efficient and alternative energy sources coming into the home. While some of that may take 10 to 20 to 30 years to finally filter through a large part of the population, I think that Maryland can be at the forefront of that. I am not one that believes we mandate it. I believe that mandatory environmentalism oftentimes has detrimental effects. It often becomes overly regulatory, too stuck to the rule, if you know what I mean. Right. But what we do find is that when people want to be green and are encouraged to be green, that a large percentage of the time they will go out of their way to make that happen, as long as we can keep the prices within reason.